The first hint that something wasn't right wasn't the roses. It was the water bill. When Daniel Harper opened the envelope from a utility company, his eyes lingered on the total far longer than usual. His quiet countryside home barely consumed any water. It was just him, a modest vegetable garden, and the occasional sprinkler running during hot summer afternoons. But the number printed on the bill was nearly 3 times higher than normal. At first, Daniel assumed it had to be an error. Still, something about it didn't sit right. When he stepped outside to check the meter, he noticed something odd. The dial was moving, slowly, steadily spinning, even though every tap inside his house was completely shut off. That could only mean one thing. Water was flowing somewhere. Carefully, Daniel traced the underground irrigation line that ran along the edge of his yard. The pipe eventually disappeared beneath the wooden fence, separating his property from the house next door. And that neighbor happened to be the newest and loudest member of the local HOA board. Her name was Linda Parker. Linda was well known in the neighborhood for 2 things: her strict, almost obsessive enforcement of HOA rules and her deep love for her rose garden. Her backyard was filled with rows of perfectly arranged roses, blooming in every imaginable shade of red and pink. Daniel had always admired them from a distance, but as he stared at the pipe slipping under the fence, a quiet realization began to settle in his mind. The roses weren't the only thing growing back there. Someone was using his water, and Daniel was determined to find out how. He didn't rush over with accusations. Instead, he observed. Over the next few days, he kept a close eye on the meter. Every morning, it spun continuously for hours, despite him not using a single drop. Then one afternoon he heard it, the faint, unmistakable hiss of sprinklers. The sound drifted from the other side of the fence. Daniel walked along the wooden panels until he spotted a narrow gap between 2 planks. Peering through, he saw Linda standing proudly in her garden, adjusting a long hose connected to a network of sprinklers that watered her prized roses. The water arched perfectly across the flower beds. But what caught Daniel's attention wasn't the flowers. It was the hose connection. A bright green hose stretched across her yard, leading straight to the base of the fence. And Daniel already knew what was waiting on the other side. Later that evening, he walked along the fence line and found exactly what he expected. Hidden beneath a thin layer of mulch was a plastic connector attached directly to his irrigation pipe. Linda had quietly tapped into his water supply. Daniel let out a slow breath. Most people would have stormed next door right then and there. But Daniel had something else in mind. Because if Linda loved her roses so much, he wanted them to grow. He just wanted them to grow in a way she would never forget. And what Daniel planned next would turn the most perfect garden in the neighborhood into something no one saw coming. The following morning, Daniel visited a small garden supply store just outside town. He picked up something unusual, a harmless landscaping dye. It was commonly used to track irrigation flow through pipes. The liquid was completely safe for plants and soil, but it had one very noticeable feature. It turned water a vivid purple, and it carried a strong, lingering smell. The scent wasn't dangerous, but it definitely wasn't pleasant. Daniel returned home and quietly poured a small amount into his irrigation tank. Then he waited. Later that afternoon, just as expected, the water meter began spinning again. On the other side of the fence, Linda's sprinklers sprang to life. The purple-tinted water flowed through the hidden connector and straight into her garden system. Daniel couldn't see the roses from his yard, but he didn't need to. Within minutes, a faint odor drifted through the air. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was noticeable. And as the sprinklers continued running, the smell grew stronger. Leaning back on his porch, Daniel sipped his iced tea. As the summer breeze carried the unusual scent across the neighborhood, the roses continued to be watered. But now, something very strange was happening to Linda's perfect garden, and it wouldn't take long for everyone to notice. By the next morning, several neighbors walking their dogs stopped outside Linda's house. Her famous rose garden looked different. The leaves carried a faint purple tint. The soil between the flowers had turned a soft violet shade. Even small puddles near the sprinkler heads shimmered slightly under the sunlight. And the smell, there was no ignoring it. Linda burst out her house, clutching a watering can. "What happened to my roses?" she shouted. A few neighbors exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of what to say. Then Linda noticed the color spreading through her flower beds. The purple water had soaked into nearly every corner of her carefully arranged garden. The roses themselves still looked healthy, but the entire yard appeared as if someone had poured gallons of grape juice into the soil. Furious, Linda marched straight to Daniel's house and pounded on the door. When he opened it, she pointed angrily toward the fence. "Did you do something to my garden water?" Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. "My garden water?" Linda froze. In that moment, she realized she had said something she probably shouldn't have. Daniel folded his arms calmly. "Linda," he said, his tone gentle, "why would my water affect your garden?" She hesitated. Nearby neighbors had begun watching from the sidewalk. "Well, because," she stammered. Daniel stepped outside and walked toward the fence. He brushed aside the mulch at its base, revealing the hidden plastic connector. The small pipe branching from his irrigation line was still firmly attached. A few neighbors gasped quietly. Daniel turned back toward her. "So this is why my water bill tripled." Linda's face flushed bright red. "I was just borrowing a little water," she muttered. Daniel nodded slowly. "A little water that runs all day." By now, the purple tint had spread across most of the garden beds. The scent lingered in the air, not unbearable, but far from pleasant. Linda looked back at her roses in disbelief. "My garden is ruined." Daniel shook his head calmly. "No, Linda, your garden is just colorful." The neighbors struggled to hold back laughter, but the situation wasn't over yet. Someone had already reported the water issue to the HOA board, and they were on their way. Within an hour, 2 board members arrived on the street. Linda rushed toward them immediately. "Daniel sabotaged my garden," she insisted. The board members walked over to the fence and examined the irrigation setup. Then they noticed the connector. One of them turned to Linda. "Is this connected to his water line?" Linda said nothing. Daniel simply showed them the utility bill and pointed toward the still spinning meter. The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Linda had always been one of the most vocal enforcers of HOA rules, but now the situation looked very different. One board member cleared his throat. "Using someone else's water supply without permission is a violation of community rules." Linda's shoulders dropped. The purple-stained soil, the lingering smell, and the watching neighbors made the moment even more humiliating. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He simply removed the connector and sealed his pipe. The purple water stopped flowing instantly, but the lesson had already taken root in Linda's garden. That evening, the HOA issued an official notice. Linda was required to pay for Daniel's excess water bill. She was also ordered to remove the unauthorized connection immediately. Over the next few weeks, her famous rose garden slowly returned to normal. The purple tint faded. The smell disappeared. But the story didn't. Neighbors still chuckled whenever they passed by her yard. Linda eventually replanted several sections and made sure her irrigation system was properly connected this time. And Daniel's water meter finally stopped spinning when it shouldn't. Sometimes the best solution isn't anger. Sometimes it's patience and a little creativity. Daniel never yelled. He never argued. He simply let the truth flow through the pipes. And in the end, the roses told the entire story. That was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA drama. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment, share your thoughts. It really helps the channel grow.